teachers of Reddit. What's the saddest thing a student has ever said to you? Before we start with the first story, please hit a subscribe and ring the notification bell to stay updated with us. Story 1. Saddest? I was a newish teacher at an alternative school that worked with high school teens suffering severe mental behavioral disabilities. It was a very small school because we dealt with the kids who had been expelled from surrounding towns. These kids just weren't always able to function well enough in a typical public school, but sometimes we got kids sent to us that did not belong at my school. Rarely, we would get a kid sent to us for stuff like, "Oh, they keep telling the principal to go f*** himself." Meanwhile, I have other kids who are heavily gang-related and on multiple felony charges. Anyway, I got this one kid early on in my career. This kid was just a nice dude. He wasn't outcast by his peer, but he also clearly did not need a specialized education. He earned solid A's in all classes and was the model student. Because class sizes were so small and attendance was always an issue, there was a day in which he was the only student in his class to be present for the day. So he and I sat, and we were coloring a map of what we imagined the island from The Most Dangerous Game looked like, and where certain events happened. As we did this, we were talking, and he opened up to me very calmly about going home from school one day and finding his mother, who had hanged herself. He told me that he had been in a really bad space and lashed out a bit at school. He then told me that a few weeks later he came home and his father, might have been stepfather, also killed himself with a shotgun. This poor kid told me all of this like he was just recounting a dream. I wanted to call his previous school and berate them. No wonder the kid was lashing out, but their solution was to expel him. I told the student that I was so proud that he even was showing up to school to learn, and that if I had been in his shoes, it would have been a totally different story. All this happened while we were coloring hand-drawn maps of an island in crayons. I am happy to say that he did return to his original school, and is one of maybe 5 kids that I ever saw escape the black hole that was the alternative school I taught at. Story 2. I used to teach at an elementary school in San Bernardino, California. 3 years as a math intervention teacher, pulling small groups. After school, I had a classic video game club. Basically ensured some of my at-risk kids could stick around and not have to worry about the crap that goes on around their neighborhoods. Anyway, I incentivized them to have a pizza party if they did their homework. Most of it is on Google Classroom, so they could do it in the club and during the party. I noticed one of my students basically just, hoarding slices. I got more than I needed for 6 elementary school kids, so I asked him why he wasn't eating, and he just said, "I can share this with my brother. We don't always get to eat after school." Needless to say, I started stuffing his bag with food snacks every day. That first night, though, I cried over that. He is a good kid, and you'll see promise lost because of circumstances a kid has no control over. Story 3. I was heading to our primary school graduation party last year and noticed one of our boys walking down the road. I stopped and asked him if he was going to the graduation, and he said yes. I asked him if he wanted a lift, and he said sure. He opened up on the way that his mother had been playing video games all night and day, so she was tired and didn't want to drive him to the party, literally 5-10 minutes away, but a good 30-minute walk. He was 11 years old. All the behavior issues we'd had with this kid all year suddenly made sense, and my heart broke. Again, I don't know if I'm cut out for this job anymore. Story 4. When I taught overseas, a student asked me how to cope with having no friends or family around. I was curious, and we talked about making new friends, adjusting to new environments, etc. And he shared that his parents sent him to that school because it was far away and had a dorm, and they were rarely in touch. Parents just paid tuition and sent living expenses monthly. He had a hard time fitting in. I believe he was on the spectrum, but the country I taught in doesn't really believe in ed, and had no friends. It broke my heart. Story 5. Handed me a note that said, "This is going to cause problems, but my dad said he was going to shoot me with his gun." We had already made a child abuse report 2 days prior because he had marks on his neck from his dad choking him. I spent a very late night that day keeping him company at the Children's Services office while they found a foster placement for him. Story 6. I recently got a new student, 4 new students, in late March, and I commented to my principal that he didn't really seem like his former teacher had described. She said he was a ladies' man with lots of girlfriends and very outgoing. I said he seemed fairly standoffish and withdrawn. I asked if she knew why there was this disconnect. My principal snarled, "Don't make any prejudgments, colonadolin." Later that day, I mentioned it to the nurse and she told me, "Oh yeah, his dad died last week." Yeah, that explains the mood for sure. Principal absolutely should have told me. Story 7. I substitute teach at a weekend school at a mosque. I got the class all teachers dread the middle school boys. They're all wild and like to test patience. Ramadan was beginning and I was encouraging the boys to help out in the kitchen cause usually it's the moms that cook. One of them, a 6th grader, goes, "I wasn't old enough to help when I had a mom, but I helped my grandmother when my dad and I visit. I still don't know what happened, but I know his mom died, and now it's just him and his dad, being buddies." I've heard much worse stories from these kids. A lot of them are refugees, and they heard and saw the most horrible things, and sometimes they process that by sharing. But this one really got me. Story 8. I taught kindergarten, and one year had a little girl that always peed herself and started randomly showing up with bruises. She had an older sister in the 3rd grade that did too. The first two times the mother explained it away, but after the 3rd time, I got another school employee and myself to talk the child. She said her daddy gets mad, etc. I submitted it to the appropriate people. Then the father wrote me this REALLY strange letter saying he knew it was me. That's not who he is. Etc. Then he proceeded to invite me to their home for dinner and even suggest him and I go see a movie sometime. The whole thing gave me really weird vibes and I never replied to the letter. A few weeks later, the father and mother pulled their kids out of school, sold their house, and went to live on a commune halfway across the country. They were Jehovah's Witnesses and found some place or something. Never saw or heard anything from them again, and the stuff I submitted was abandoned because they left the state. Story 9. Sometimes at night, my dad comes into my room and does stuff to me, like sex stuff. She was 10. It had been happening since before she started school. Child protection and the police responded the next day, and I went with her to the police station where they collected video evidence. If I hadn't gone, she would have been alone, or with strangers for -5 hours. The saddest part was when she said, "I love my dad and I don't want him to get in trouble. I just don't want him to do it again." Story 10. I'm not a teacher anymore, but my family member works in a school. She had a student talk with her in December and said, "I have a new foster family because my old foster parents don't keep their foster kids for Christmas because it's too expensive." Poor kid got tossed from the home he'd been in for 11 months because the foster family couldn't be bothered to get him anything or sign him up for a sub for Santa program. He just wanted to celebrate a regular Christmas with a non-abusive family, and instead he was bounced to a different home. The worst part was, the new foster home was in a different school district, so the district admin decided it was the perfect time to force him to switch to a new school in the new district so they wouldn't have to pay for his one-on-one needs anymore. He lost every single bit of stability in his life because a couple of couldn't be bothered to buy a few cheap gifts from the dollar store. Story 11. I had a student who was put on independent studies with less than 4 weeks to graduation, and he was a senior. Why? Because he was home when his older brother came home in some sort of mental breakdown and attacked their mother and then himself. After a few days on life support, the mother died by the time he'd been assigned to me. Most of the shock had worn off, and he was still trying to figure things out. Because he was still 17, our principal became guardian ad litem, including a middle school sibling and a toddler. He'd be turning 18 in a few weeks and was willing to be guardian for the siblings. Things had started to stabilize, until one morning about 2 weeks after the funeral, when long-lost relatives of the mother showed up from across the country and took custody of the toddler. Like just showed up one night and took the toddler. He was an absolute mess in my office and I had no idea what to say or do. I called the principal who came to get him. It was all just so sad. I know he graduated, but I never saw him again. I hope he and his family found healing out there. Story 12. I teach a small group of SEN teens English, and one was getting really upset about their writing not being good enough. I told him that it'll get better as he gets older if he keeps trying, but I won't get older. Why not? Mom says I will always be a useless child. Broke my heart. The teens I teach have quite high-functioning autism, so they know that they're different, and they know that they can't do anything to change it, and then they have parents that say things like that. Story 13. I don't know why the other kids think I'm not normal. It's not like my parents tried to me or anything. The kid was in the foster system because her parents had, in fact, tried to kill her when she was younger, under 5. The trauma has messed up her brain so much that she's now 13 and has bounced between so many homes that we lost count. As a result, she'd also been in so many schools that making friends. even without her traumatic past, would be difficult. We had a psychological assessment done on her, and the assessment suggested that she mentally hasn't developed past a 4-year-old, meaning her trauma essentially stopped her brain from developing. The other kids hated her because she had no clue how to interact with them age appropriately, but she is so desperate for validation that she would do anything for anyone who would recognize her, unfortunately. She had many classmates who would try to blackmail, exploit, or extort her to get what they wanted, and then ditch her. She moved on to a new home a few months ago, and I have no clue how she'll function in adulthood. I'm fairly certain she'll be a teen mom in a few years because someone will give her some validation in exchange for sex and then leave her out to dry with a baby she cannot raise. And no family to support her in trying to get child support from the deadbeat. Story 14. I'm not a qualified teacher. I'm a mental health nurse for my sins. But when considering my career option, I did take a year out of my first degree to teach. The base I worked at was for kids from non-standard academic backgrounds. That is, had been expelled from mainstream education and consequently labeled as challenging. So many of those poor sods described themselves variously as useless, unworthy, and the general consensus amongst the majority was, why should I bother, when I'll never amount to anything anyway? One of my proudest achievements to date is that I helped this one kid create their CV, as they were struggling to sell themselves due to self-doubt. We worked together for ages to figure out what they felt their achievements were, etc. As she really wanted to do a job in home care for the elderly, mentally ill, and otherwise disadvantaged. She was so anxious about how she came across, it broke my heart. Now, she just registered her own home care company, has a brand new car, and is a successful businesswoman, probably bringing in more than me. I could not be more proud either. Story 15. My wife had a student, first grade, who was living in a hotel room with his mother, 3 siblings, and the mother's abusive boyfriend. The entire family fled from Ohio to get out of an abusive situation with the kid's father, and this child had already been to 3 schools before the age of 6. He never handed in homework, the mother never came to conferences, and all the kids wore long sleeves the entire year, even during hot weather. Absolutely no stability, and all he knows is abusive situations for him and his brother and sisters. They were all severely behind. The mother took the kids and moved to Texas before the school year ended. My wife was super sad the day that kids said goodbye. Alright folks, that's a wrap. If you like more of this, please hit a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. You can also share your thoughts in the comment below. I'll see you in the next video.